Welcome everyone to Visionary Psychics. I'm Sara Wiseman and I'm here with one of our Visionary Psychics, Dr. Steve Koch. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Sara.
So the series of interviews that we've been doing with all of the people who have really interesting gifts and really interesting experiences and practices with spirituality and intuition and energy healing. And you've really been a healer, energy healer, and a chiropractic healer for many decades. And you also have really strong intuitive gifts. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how those combine for you, or what your experience is in feeling or sensing the energy when you're working on somebody doing any kind of energetic healing.
Well, thank you. So yeah, I practiced as a chiropractor for 40 years. And the reason I got back into that back then was because at that time in the early 70s, that was kind of the best option to have a legal way to, put hands on people and heal them, to have a degree and so forth. Now there's a lot more options for people, massage therapists, physical therapists, or any number of energy healing type modalities. But I was attracted to the chiropractic as a way to maybe legitimize what I'd already known and was already doing, because a lot of it came naturally. So a lot of it came from, periods of time as a child when I would have experiences and didn't have terminology for it. But in my teen years, as I started practicing yoga and meditation and discovered natural healing and chiropractic, I got into it that way and found an outlet for my healing work to combine it with an actual practice, and found that worked really well to do it that way. And well, funny thing, one person said to me once, they just looked up at me as they were lying on the chiropractic table and they said, "You're not just giving me an adjustment, are you?" And I was like, "What do you mean by that?" They go, "There's all this other stuff going on." I go, "Yep, that's what we call the energy work." And it wasn't like it was secret, but it was just, I had hands contact with people, and I would use my inner tools to focus that at the same time. And some people picked up on it and knew what I was doing. Other people just felt like, "Oh, that was a good chiropractic session." And
How
so
did you feel? Yeah, so you entered, at least from um, Northern American, you entered the meditation world pretty early on in the 70s. Now it's very popular, but you were
Mhm.
sort of one of the early practitioners, or
Early adapter.
early adopter, yeah. Um, and from what you and I have talked about, like, you journeyed, you meditated in a deep practice a lot for long periods of time and had really interesting journeying and experiences. What was that like, kind of being outside of the normal mainstream at that time? And how do you think that changed you in terms of how you approach your life?
There's a lot to that question there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was looking for something and found yoga. And the type of yoga I found was very intense with the meditation aspect, and things that I already had done accidentally or on my own, such as astral projection, communicating with ancestors who were no longer in the physical realm, things like that. A lot of answers were right there. Like, "Oh, that's not odd what you're doing. At the end of yoga class, you lie in your corpse pose and you float above your body." And it's like, "Oh, I know that. I've been doing that since I was a kid." And so it just gave, for me, even though what I was practicing was outside the norm, and in the early 70s was not something that you would find a lot of people to have conversations with, I found that even just the few people I met who were into it validated and gave me like reassurance that this was not just something I was making up. There were old traditions going back thousands of years talking about this stuff. And I was thrilled. And I got into it very deeply and kind of extremely, you could say, and um, found that it was actually a relief, kind of like finding your own tribe. And so it didn't matter like whether the society was into it. I became a vegetarian when it was still considered an eating disorder. And, people my age, as teenagers are being sent, for therapy, counseling, because it was considered, some type of act of rebellion or some type of crazy fad. And, it's just a matter of, just having a few people around who were supportive, and funny that as I started being more open about what I was practicing and doing, I'd find even relatives or, in the church I was raised in, some of the old people would be like, oh yes. And they tell me stories about what happened in the old country. And, it turns out there's a lot of mysticism and a lot of things going on that people weren't just didn't want to talk about. So I found out that, I had a lot of relatives who understood this and were into this or could appreciate it. They didn't have the terminology any more than I did, but I was getting it through the kind of like the new age movement that was coming up in the 70s. So it it was a relief. And even though it was strange and odd at that time, kind of everything was, if you were, I was kind of young to be a hippie, but I was kind of like a junior hippie, wannabe hippie, because I was, a little young, in the 60s still. I was too young to go to Woodstock, to use an example. I was just, 10 years old or 12 years old or something. But so being on the outside was not really an issue. I didn't want to be part of the classic society, corporate life, and so forth. So I actually welcomed something that was non-mainstream in my life.
When I've been talking to a lot of the other people in this visionary psychics, there's a definite line of some people are very strong, with different gifts. And one of the things I find is that many of the people in this group that's doing this series, they're what I'd call natural born mediums. And it feels like even though you might not label yourself that, it feels like from talking to you, that's what you are. You've always had experiences with the departed, including sometimes that I remember, you and I being in a place together, and you you're having conversations with departed, like almost from historical times, and I can't see them. So tell me a little bit about when that started for you, and what that looks and feels like to you.
Well, when it started was it came out of kind of a funny fear type based thing. I would be left at my grandmother's a lot, and she barely spoke English, and I would get put to bed and I'd be afraid for whatever reason to be put alone in a room in the dark. And she would light her little votive candles. She had an altar on her dresser with pictures of my deceased grandfather, other deceased relatives, along with religious icons, Jesus and Mary, and different, it was the Christian Orthodox religion. And so the different saints. And so there's this altar set up of all these photos, and little candles with red glass. So they made the cool glow and they would flicker. And she would tell me that they were watching over me and were protecting me. So I didn't have to be afraid at night. And I thought, okay, well, I should, she would leave the room and I'd still be afraid, but I said, well, they're here to watch over me. Let me talk to them. So I would start in my mind, not out loud. I don't think, maybe I talked out loud. It was a long time ago. But I spoke to myself in my mind, and it gave me relief, and I felt comfortable, and I felt connected with these people who I actually never met in person.
Mhm.
And it got a little freaky though when they started talking back.
Mhm.
It was one thing for me to talk to them and talk to these pictures, but when they started speaking back to me, it kind of woke me up. Literally, it
Mhm.
kind of started keeping me up at night, that I was able to communicate, hear back from them, and everything was reassuring and benevolent that they would have to say, but it was something I kept to myself because it was a little frightening. And I didn't focus on it very much. But then around, in the 90s, I started catching glimpses out of the corner of my eye of different people in different scenarios. And I would be curious and I'd start asking questions about, who used to live in this house or what used to happen on this property, and start to realize that I was seeing like whatever imprints or images or, um, you know, leftover shadows or presence of active spirits going on in places, and would communicate with them and start talking with them, and they would speak back with me too. And it's like, okay, so kind of in the 90s, it started clicking in with that and realizing that this is something that could be valuable. I shouldn't have just been ignoring, or not that I shouldn't have, but I ignored it for a lot of years, and now I'm not going to ignore it anymore. And I'm going to use the information that comes to me. One thing we had together when we were sitting at the foot of the Sphinx in Egypt, the Great Sphinx, and I was having all kinds of um, input coming in. I don't know if that's one of the times you were talking about, and that brings up past lives and all kinds of other connections too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about Egypt actually, because the people, we went on a trip with other people, and it was a spiritual trip, and people were having lots of different versions of experiences, um, and it was super powerful. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things about Egypt is, it's so many thousands of years of beings who have departed, but are all these lifetime after lifetime. But like here out where we are in Oregon, it's much less populated, and there's been less people here for less centuries. So like there's just less departed density kind of here. I
Yeah.
go to
Yeah.
Europe, there's more, where different, but Egypt was kind of like the powerhouse of civilization and departed and past lives.
One thing
Um,
that comes to oh, sorry,
no,
forgot
go
now.
ahead.
One thing that comes to mind that once I acknowledged that I was able to connect with beings that weren't here physically, I found a lot of them just were kind of confused and didn't know how to move on and help them move on. So I've done a lot of work with helping them move on, which has been it's been beneficial for me too, to have that sense of, we need to move on when things are done. Even
Mhm,
applying that to
mhm,
my own life here, on just a practical basis. When it's time to move on, we need to move on.
mhm.
And that's just a thought that came. I wanted to share.
Um, how would you, with your own life now, what are the practices that you are finding, maybe not what you did when you were younger, but
Mhm.
like now, what do you find the most beneficial in where you are now?
Right now, I find the most beneficial is to try to be in active meditation all the time, being
Mhm,
aware of awareness, just being aware that I'm aware, being aware of, from the simple grounded of where am I on earth? I'll go through techniques of just, feeling the chair I'm sitting in, the room I'm sitting in, the house that the room is in, the block that the house is on, all the way expanding out to infinite imagination, and being grounded in that and being present, staying in the heart, trying to be in the heart and feeling connected with myself and all the life around me, connecting with oneness, that part of me that experienced and experiences the oneness of all. And there are techniques. I mean, I will sit and meditate quietly, or I like music a lot these days. I'll get lost in playing an instrument. So the music is helpful. Some of the exercises we go through, like the blind readings, that was a surprise to me. I never thought I'd, that I didn't even think I had that kind of intuitive skill that way. But when I did the blind readings, and then finding when you go through the whole process, you're like, whoa, that was so accurate and right on, out of, basically out of the thin air I pulled, that came to me. And so forth. Now that's been happening kind of accidentally my whole life, talking about going back to childhood, being aware of things. And when you're a kid, a lot of times the adults don't like it. So they tell you that, they gaslight you.
Right.
They tell you that you're crazy, you're wrong, etc. But doing the exercises with you, it just reaffirmed that connection.
I'll just explain. So we have this game, just for people watching. We call it the game, and basically we just each sit down in meditative state together, like we're just relaxing, and then one person will think of a question, but they don't tell the other person, and then the other person will get a vision. And so the person will get the vision, they'll tell what the vision is, and then the other person will reveal the question. And we'll do this, I don't know, 3 questions each on either side. And it's been astonishing how accurate the game continually is, but also how it helps, like if we're working with questions that are like about the future directions, how or what is unfolding.
Or just understanding the nature of a situation, what's happening with the person or a situation or a place or something. And it's crazy accurate how that.
It's crazy accurate.
Yeah. And that when you put it all together at the end, it's like, the person who was asking the question, the person who had the vision, had no communication directly besides energetically. And yet the answer and the question and the vision all go together as if it was all written in, one flow.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, so by now, for people watching, full disclosure, Dr. Steve and I are married. So we live in the same house. What? No one told me. So we do a lot of this practicing from a really, from this place of having a little bit different gifts, and then wanting to figure out our lives and how can we use these tools to kind of stay on the course. And it's just been really interesting, especially these last few years, as everybody's been going through, but to notice all the changes in the world, and then to continually being like in search of awareness, or meditating on awareness as our attempted way of living, or how we're trying to live, committing to that. How are you dealing with, how do you deal with, or what ways are you thinking about, not just the world irritations, but like the common irritations of, say, whatever it could be? How are you learning to navigate that? Trick question.
I am never irritated. No, as you know from living with me, would you say high maintenance? No. No, I have lots of opinions and feelings, and don't hesitate expressing them. But the irritating part, the thing that helps every time when and if I can remember it, is for me, there is this truth that I feel is one of the few things that I can say I know. Like there's few things I say I know. The first one is I know I don't know much, so that I can count on. And there's a few other things, but one is that whatever is irritating me or bugging me in the world and another person in a scenario, it's about what's going on in me.
Mm-hmm.
It's either exactly what's going on with me, like a person's bugging me about something. Well, whatever it is about them, that's because that's part of my personality and how I speak,
Mm-hmm.
how I act, and what I've done in the past, whatever. It's across the board, always, a reflection of me. So if I can remember that, it gets me to laugh and go, oh yeah, this person's just reflecting me back to me, and I'm upset about myself. What am I going to do about it?
Right.
And sometimes there's action to take. Sometimes it's be still and be quiet. Sometimes it's just, that's the way I am. Don't get bugged about the other person. So that's the main thing. If I can remember that.
So kind of,
Breathing. The
oh,
other thing is
so
making sure I breathe. And
so kind of like a way of rephrasing that might be like this idea that the universe is pretty much always bringing us our soul lessons.
mm-hmm.
And so every event, good, bad, neutral, shows up to kind of help us hone in on our awareness, like reminds of us of our awareness.
Yeah, yeah.
Like talking about synchronicities or events as disruptors. It could even be like a lot of people watching know, like I recently fell off my bike, you were there. And like I would consider that as like a disruptor, something that happens out of the ordinary that helps brought me back to focus on what happened there? Why did it happen? What's it all about? Just like this kind of continued way the universe is in conversation with us. Um, yeah, and the breathing, that's especially dealing with, and this will probably be our last question. The breath work that you do is very specific and comes from ancient tradition, and um, that has a more of a physiological shifting as well as a spiritual. How does that work for you? Or tell us a little bit about that part.
Sure. I think everything has a physiological component if you slow down and look at what all the things are happening. And often I'll find that I'm either not breathing, holding my breath, or breathing shallow. So focusing on just making sure I am breathing. For me, I always say exhale. People usually say inhale, inhale. It's like, wait, you can't fill a glass that's already full, just pours over. Exhale, get it all out. If I find I'm not breathing, the first thing I do is exhale completely. And then the big inhale comes naturally afterwards, and do it a couple of times. And I like to, when I wake up, when I'm first conscious in the morning, I try to prime my breath. I'll take a few deep breaths just to make sure that I'm starting off right to begin with, and I'm got a good flow going, and my breath is focusing. The breath work that I studied and did for a long time was often tied in with mantra and chanting and yoga postures and so forth. So, I did that for a long time, lived in a yoga ashram, and, as a regular daily practice, did a lot of that. As I'm aging, I guess I'm shifting some of my practices. Like I said, music, things that are art, painting, doing things that, while I'm doing art, I'm breathing deeply the whole time. I'm focusing on that too. Same with the music. So I find that I incorporate just basic breathing with things that are gentler, because as the body ages, it just doesn't want to do, holding extreme yoga postures for a long time and doing, intense breathing and so forth. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
Yeah, I guess finally, so with your unique mix of abilities, in terms of working with people, what are some of the ways that you would prefer you like to work with people best now? I guess this will be our last thing.
okay. Now I like to work with people through being with them, speaking with them, listening, being present, about being present and being aware, getting to that space myself, and then being an assistant to the other person to help bring them into that same space that we can share it together. The more that we can all be connected in that oneness and awareness of the present, it's just a beautiful thing. I've tended to work a lot with, I've used the term healers from going back to the beginning of my chiropractic practice. It's like some of my first patients were other chiropractors who came to me, and massage therapists. I tended to draw a lot of these people who were working in the healing field and needed to do their own self-care and get their own healing. And since I was in that field myself, I understood that at a depth. So even now, as I'm doing consulting on, on Zoom and working with people, I'm tending to work more with people who are into this as their own profession and practice, as opposed to someone coming to me looking for advice or counseling on their day-to-day life stuff. It's more about their healing practices or their own how do they take care of themselves, preventing burnout, becoming more effective. After doing this for so many years, it's like there's patterns,
Right.
and it's like right away I tend to, like I say, work with a lot of healers and intuitives and people who are looking for ways to advance themselves and wondering, what's on that path. It's like, not that I'm gotten anywhere that is better or worse or anything. It's just that at this age, I've walked a certain road. There's people who are ahead of me who I look to. I've always done that my whole life. Look to elders for direction. And now I'm playing the elder card. Hey, for certain things, I'm kind of an elder. I've hit that. So if you want to hang out and chat, maybe it'll be beneficial for all of us or not. So that's kind of how my focus of my practice now. I'm not doing hands-on healing. I do a little bit of distance energy healing work, but again, it's usually mostly with other healers and practitioners who are needing a boost themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really put out there or have an intention to, be doing that type of healing practice for kind of like a general public who just has a pain or ache or something going on. It's more of the soul work or the soul processing.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Steve, for being with us. And we will put, like we're doing with everybody, we'll put the ways for people to contact you
Okay.
down below. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Sarah.
Thank you.